We begin with a Fox News alert. President Trump is now headed for Mar-a-Lago, Florida, after signing a historic tax bill into law. He also signed a bill to keep the government running through mid-January. The president is now set to spend the holidays in Florida as he looks ahead to a very busy 2018. Not that 2017 wasn't busy. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here today from the Fox Business Network. Dagan McDowell, Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, and outnumbered today, Fox News contributor and political editor of townhall.com, Guy Benson. What a guy. It never gets old, really.
Those intros, you were like an NBA stadium announcer.
I did sports for a little while. Early in my career.
Great.
That was good.
Yeah.
You're feeling the Christmas spirit, I can
And
tell.
news director said, stick with news.
I don't know
take
about
that
that now.
I thought I was going to be a singer. My mom said this wasn't going to happen. Lessons
great
you have to
voice.
learn growing up. Right?
Maybe she'll sing for us this hour. Let's do the news. President Trump, again, is headed for Mar-a-Lago for Christmas. Before he left the White House just a few minutes ago, he signed two big bills into law. A bill to keep the government running through the middle of January, January 19th, and the historic tax bill that marks his first major legislative victory. Here he is.
I watched the news. As you know, we had the largest tax cuts in our history just approved. And I was going to wait for a formal signing sometime in early January. But then I watched the news this morning and they were all saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it by Christmas? You were one. But will he sign it by Christmas? And I called downstairs. I said, get it ready. We have to sign it now. Bottom line is this is the biggest tax cuts and reform in the history of our country. This is bigger than actually President Reagan's many years ago. I'm very honored by it. And all of this, everything in here, is really tremendous things for businesses, for people, for the middle class, for workers.
Big day. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live at the White House. John?
It was a big day, Harris. Good afternoon to you. This was the president's biggest legislative issue item. This was the thing that he campaigned on during the campaign and talked about as president for the last 11 months. Obamacare went first because he wanted to get extra money in there to put into this tax reform package. But tax reform was, for lack of a better phrase, the big kahuna for President Trump. He got it done kind of in record amount of time in terms of going from Congress down here to the White House. It's a huge bill. It had to go through the enrollment process, and the White House had to review it. But they got it in time for him to put pen to paper this morning and sign it just before he took off for his Christmas break. Listen to more about what the president said this morning.
This is the bill right here, and we're very proud of it. It's going to be a tremendous thing for the American people. I didn't want you folks to say that I wasn't keeping my promise. I am keeping my promise. I'm signing it before Christmas. I said that the bill would be on my desk before Christmas, and you are holding me literally to that. So we did a rush job today. It's not fancy, but it's the Oval Office.
No Democratic support for this bill. It passed only with Republican support. The president would like to change that next year. He's got some big legislative agenda items that he wants to get through, some of which will need Democratic support. One of those is rebuilding America's infrastructure. The president tweeting this morning, quote, at some point, and for the good of the country, I predict we will start working with the Democrats in a bipartisan fashion. Infrastructure would be a perfect place to start after having foolishly spent $7 trillion in the Middle East. It's time to start rebuilding our country. The president talked about the positive effects of tax reform already. Big corporations like Boeing, AT&T, Comcast, Wells Fargo, and Fifth Third Bank all giving out either Christmas bonuses to employees or increasing their minimum wage to $15 an hour. Boeing actually saying that it was going to increase charitable contributions because of that. While it is possible that the president could get bipartisan support for infrastructure, Harris, a couple of other agenda items he's got that will be much more difficult to attract Democratic support. Immigration reform, though he does want to get that DACA fix done, and that'll involve Democrats, and welfare reform. It's not likely that a lot of Democrats will want to sign on to welfare reform, but like President Clinton did in 1996, President Trump could use the reconciliation process to get welfare reform through on a simple majority. So we'll see where that goes. No question, a lot to come in 2018. If 2017 wasn't busy enough for you, just wait a little while.
Yep, you got it. Add water and stir. John Roberts, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas, my friend.
And to you, too.
Thank you. You know what I'm noticing is kind of a trend, as John Roberts was reporting there? The president isn't looking to just get DACA. He's not looking just for tax cuts. It's a reformation. Why is that? Because that makes things more difficult to get. You heard immigration reform, welfare reform. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think reform is a buzzword in Washington, which is basically changing the law to make it what you want it to be.
Oh, thank you.
Okay,
all right.
So that's the framing of it, right? The thing that struck me, Harris, watching the video there from the president as it came in, and we talked about this morning on Maria Bartiromo's show, Dagan, I was a little bit confused that they were going to have this not live, not dramatic signing ceremony with the president all by himself in the Oval Office. It seemed like a big missed opportunity, optics-wise, for the White House. And then we heard what the president actually said, and his explanation made perfect sense to me, which is, I wanted to get this thing signed as soon as possible, keep the pre-Christmas promise, get this thing, the logistics implemented as soon as possible. And then they said there's going to be another ceremony coming up in the new year to remind everyone about tax reform. And my recommendation for the White House, go out and find middle-class families from across the country that are going to benefit from this tax reform bill. It won't be hard to find them because it's 80% of Americans. Have them surrounding the president when he does the more symbolic ceremony and drive that point home.
You know, I wonder, though, if the Republicans, Lisa, aren't in the risk of looking the mission accomplished banner like. You know, you heard the president say, you've heard others among lawmakers who helped pass the tax legislation. February 1st is really when you start to feel that. Why don't you do it on February 2nd? Right? Then you have everybody with their paychecks, or February 10th, or whatever it is, that you open up that paycheck and you really start to see it.
See, if I was the Republicans and President Trump, I would be pushing this as the massive political win that it absolutely is, because the media sure isn't going to give them credit. So President Trump,
Right.
Republicans need to go out there, claim that banner, because this is a huge win. This is something they've been trying to get done for 30 years. And it's not just tax reform. It's drilling in Anwar, something that proponents have been trying to get done for 40 years. It's the repeal of the individual mandate, something Republicans have been promising for 8 years now. And so this is a massive win. And for a president who the left and the media has continued to criticize for his truthfulness, this is a president who has demonstrated that he keeps his promises. You can go down the list: immigration, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, pushing back on ISIS, confirming Neil Gorsuch.
Crushing ISIS.
Crushing ISIS. The list goes on and on and on about him keeping his promises.
And the regulatory reform has been a huge thing that has been driving the stock market this year. We can't, one new regulation, 22 regulations gone. Because you had an entire, talk about reformation, a government takeover of student loans, of the internet, of essentially health care in this country. Dodd-Frank regulations under Obama, a lot of that has been rolled back. But
so my question, though, was specifically about risk. And what I hear you saying, Lisa, is you don't buy into that at all. Just go out and get it done.
Right.
This is such a huge win, because I followed each little baby step of them putting this plan together, starting with they were going to have that border adjustment tax. That was the original Paul Ryan idea.
Which was heavily criticized by many Republicans.
There were so many dumb ideas that were thrown out, reducing 401k contributions, changing the way that capital gains are handled for retail investors.
Are you happy with where it is now?
Yes, they didn't, but those things didn't end up in this. And the fact that they coalesced around something that is pro-growth, that hands a tax cut to 80% or more Americans, that it is astonishing.
Jessica, before I come to you, my big question for you is, when do Democrats jump into the warmer waters now? But before that, the president actually talked earlier, just moments ago, about what he has learned in terms of working with people in Congress and shaping relationships. Let's watch that.
It's been a process. It's been a great process, really beautiful. But I do believe that the fact that I have gotten to know so many of these people, and many of these people, I have to say, not saying all, but I'm saying many of these people are great people that truly love this country. So I think that helps. And I think you'll see that in this legislation.
You also saw the president talking about when the time is for bipartisanship, those opportunities. He fully anticipates infrastructure. He said that'll be the easiest thing he does. So when did Democrats jump in?
I think they certainly jump in if infrastructure is what comes next. He'll have to talk to Paul Ryan, who wants welfare reform next. I think that's a major mistake for Republicans to go after that right now, because if you get into a fight with Democrats about entitlement reform after you've had this arguably huge win on the tax reform bill or the tax bill, I think that doesn't bode well. Infrastructure, Donald Trump knows he's an infrastructure guy. He builds buildings, and he's worked with Democrats his whole life. He's a New Yorker. We're full of Democrats here. And I think that he's smart to say that that's the moment. But to your question to Lisa about the riskiness here.
I want to say something about infrastructure, though. This is critically important. You have several $1 trillion, $2.5 trillion thereabouts. President Trump says it's $4 trillion of money, of profits that are overseas, that with a 15.5% repatriation tax that is in this tax reform bill, if that money comes back here, it's taxed immediately, and it has been talked about by major politicians that that's one way that they could pay for infrastructure. And that is why the Democrats won't get on board with it, because that would hand the president a win. So let's get ready for Pelosi pothole to try and help her.
I'm really not sure that that's true. We all are acutely aware of the fact that we have 10 Democrat senators up for re-election in states that went blood red for Donald Trump. Joe Manchin needs to do this stuff. Claire McCaskill, Heidi Heitkamp.
You think they would do it?
I do think
Heidi
they will.
Heitkamp was literally making up things about this tax bill.
Heidi Heitkamp got on Air Force One and stood up there on the same stage with Donald Trump to appeal to North Dakotans to say, I understand that you voted for this man and that some of his agenda does appeal to you.
She said that it was going to be a $9,000 tax hike on people in her state, and it's a lie. She couldn't read a
Do you know
chart.
how many lies come out of both sides? And it's unfortunate.
She couldn't read numbers, and she still hasn't retracted it.
I'm pretty confident that Heidi Heitkamp can read numbers. I'm also confident that we know what we need to do to win, and some of that might be to stand on stage with Donald Trump and to work together on infrastructure to make sure.
Against him. All right. Like, so she stood on stage with him and then voted no.
Yeah, but that bill is not good for Americans.
I want to assure everyone that our Christmas spirit is strong. All right. Well, it looks like Democrats have their work cut out for them in 2018. They have failed to deliver on a fix for DACA, the Obama-era program that protects from deportation thousands of undocumented immigrants brought here as children. Before the Senate vote on the spending bill yesterday, or the continuing resolution to kick it to January 19th, members of the Hispanic Caucus, a 31-member group of the House and Senate Democrats, gathered in Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer's office, trying to push him to do more for those so-called dreamers. It reportedly got pretty heated. Congressional leaders have signaled they'll revisit the DACA issue in the new year. The program ends March 5th, so you got another looming deadline. Lisa?
Well, look, so March 5th is like forever in congressional terms. So that's
it's 2 government shutdowns away.
Yeah, we are so far away from that. It's like a year away. So I think that's why this isn't getting done right now. And I also think that I would have to guess that Speaker Ryan and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell gave assurances to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer that something's going to get done on DACA. But if you're President Trump, this is the opportunity for him to leverage DACA to get some of his immigration priorities done. So I think it would be malpractice for him to not push for funding for the border wall, not push for the RAISE Act, not push for some of these principles that he's campaigned on and that he said were his priorities.
Yeah, Guy?
I think the contours for a deal on DACA are there. And I went back when this first arose as an issue when President Trump canceled Obama's policy. I went back and looked at that Gang of 8 bill that passed the Senate but not the House during the end of the Obama administration. And in that bill, which all the Senate Democrats supported, it called for 700 miles of completed fencing, a physical barrier, and a doubling of border agents.
Well, and Democrats have voted for fencing
they all
as well.
voted for it. So I think if you're going to say, let's do this DACA thing, which I think is fair and the right thing to do, let's get some border security in there as well. And here's what Democrats are already on the record supporting. I think that's how this gets done.
Well, here's how we know that the president has that in mind, because when he spoke at his last cabinet meeting, we think, for the year, he said, you never know, but it was supposed to be.
They could all show up at Mar-a-Lago.
He specifically talked about how he wants to go down and visit the wall and see those half-dozen prototypes that they've been working on. Remember, in Arizona, we had it on overtime about a month ago when they were choosing, and we sent a reporter down. We got to kick the tires and see those prototypes. The president has said that's next on his to-do list, and wouldn't it be, I mean, it's kind of sequential, right? For him to fold that into someplace with the legislation they're working on. Dagan?
Well, what's going on in Mexico, too, gives him support for his idea to really crack down on illegal immigration. This is going to be the deadliest year in modern history for Mexico in terms of murders. You have stories about, bodies hanging off bridges in tourist destinations. This teenager killed because he said something negative on social media about a drug cartel kingpin. So I think that that resonates with the American people. And also, to Nancy Pelosi's point, DACA, I said this on this very couch, that she literally was more concerned about 700,000 people under DACA than the 140 million people that this tax reform now law impacts. And I think in terms of optics, that kind of says it all. It's this sliver of people in this country versus a giant swath of this country that she's really concerned about.
Yeah, but at the same time, Jessica, as much as that may be true, the Dreamers don't feel that way at all. Remember when she got bum rushed at the lectern almost 2 months ago now? They were not happy with her focus and what it has been on DACA. So even though you may feel like there's a sliver, the sliver isn't even happy.
No, well, but we do know, which rarely happens, that we have politicians on both sides of the aisle that are making DACA their priority. Jeff Flake said when he went into negotiations to get a yes vote on the tax reform bill, he said that he wanted the provisions for DACA, and he got a little steamrolled there, I think, on that front. So I do see this happening. I agree with you that it should be attached for Republicans' benefit and, frankly, for the safety of Americans, and even messaging for Democrats going into 2018 that we do need to have some enhanced border security measures that we can say, hey, we heard you. We know how you reacted to what happened to Kate Steinle and the verdict there, and we know what's going on in some of these sanctuary cities.
That would be a little revisionist history, though, because we didn't hear from many Democrats when that was going on.
No,
just going to insert that.
Or from Hillary Clinton either during, because she was actually criticized. Was it Chris Matthews had criticized her for not addressing illegality during the campaign? He said that hurt her. So that's interesting for you to make that point.
I mean, you have to. Donald Trump certainly won, at least in part, to the harsh rhetoric about illegal immigrants who come here and hurt people, not the 11 million who are here and are working hard and want their kids to have a better life.
Have a real opportunity, and they may use it, as I'm hearing, because there is some shifting now in how they would see handling issues like DACA and immigration for families, keeping those core families together.
And let's hope those stories where they're separating families do not continue.
Turning the economy around, and today was a mic drop.
All right. Okay. Mic drop for you. Move on. Democrats make their pick for the top guy on the House Judiciary Committee, not our guy there. And it may show they're preparing to push for the president's impeachment. We'll talk about that. And new reaction to the explosive report this week alleging that the Obama administration gave a major terrorist group a pass in order to preserve the nuclear deal with Iran. Stay close.
A growing number of Republicans demanding answers after an investigative report claims the Obama administration gave a free pass to Hezbollah's drug trafficking and money laundering operations, and did it to make sure the Iran nuclear deal stayed on track. Senator Ben Sasse asking the Justice, Treasury, and State Departments for, quote, answers to these disturbing allegations. And the Nebraska Republican adding in his letter, quote, if the administration did so in order to shore up its foolish nuclear deal with Iran, it was a mistake of historical proportions, a mistake the consequences of which reach from the battlefields of Syria to the streets of Omaha and Scotts Bluff. Wow. Guy, these are incredible charges, but I think for anybody who feels like this is a bad deal to begin with, this makes it smell bad, even worse.
Yeah, and you start to wonder, were there no depths to which the Obama administration was unwilling to go in order to pursue this terrible nuclear deal with an Iranian regime that cheats all the time, that their leaders chant death to America. It was a lopsided, terrible deal. And apparently the Obama administration was able to let Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, off the hook for a drug trafficking ring, which they used to cull money for terrorist activities, and we turned a blind eye to it deliberately to grease the skids for this nuclear deal with the regime in Tehran, which is extraordinary. that's the foreign policy side of it. Part of the reason that this story really bothers me, there's a great column today in the New York Post from David Harsanyi, who's tracking the media coverage or lack thereof of this particular story. It came out in Politico. This was a meticulously sourced, multiple named sources, documents that back up this story, and it has been greeted with near silence from most of the mainstream media.
Except for the Wall Street Journal editorial page. They wrote an editorial about it. And one of the quotes is an Obama Treasury official telling the House Foreign Affairs Committee that under the Obama administration, Hezbollah-related, quote, investigations were tamped down for fear of rocking the boat with Iran.
Wow.
Jeopardizing the nuclear deal.
Look, this is the administration that gave us the talking point from the president himself of a JV team for the Islamic State savages, as I call them. And look how long it took us, not the decade that some Democrats said that it would take us to take them down out of their nesting hole in Raqqa, Syria. But look how long it did take us, though, because we were under the determination by the Obama administration that they were not big players on the landscape of terrorism. But, you know, this causes, I think, and I'll be quick with this, a look at what we've recently learned from Ambassador Nikki Haley's investigation at the UN and those warehouse sites that were behind her, that she's invited other countries to look at that map, that poster board, and see where the Iranian markings were on weapons that are killing so many people and forcing a humanitarian crisis in Yemen through a proxy war. It makes me look to see, well, how long had that been going on? And does this also fall under that category of the Obama administration wanting to tamp things down? But maybe not look. It's just a question.
Well, and we knew this, though. Even as we were negotiating as a nation this Iran nuclear deal, Iran, then and now, state sponsor of terrorism.
The number one in the world.
Number one, funneling money to terrorist organizations. Hezbollah in Yemen, these Yemen rebels firing these missiles that you're talking about at Saudi Arabia. We knew this. And this administration, as part of this nuclear deal with Iran, shipped $1.7 billion in cash, pallets of cash, in the middle of the night, and we would never know about it if not for the Wall Street Journal.
Let's just put this in a nutshell, too. I mean, the President Obama, essentially by turning a blind eye, propped up Hezbollah with $1 billion, they said, in a year they profited off of this, for his legacy. To protect his legacy, which was the Iran deal. And it wasn't just the Obama administration turning a blind eye. It's the media. Newsbusters reported on the media blackout from ABC, CBS, and NBC on this story, which was well-sourced. Meanwhile, running countless stories about the Russia investigation that has turned out not to be true from anonymous sources.
Well, listen, I think it is a great disservice to everybody that the entire news media is talking about this story. It's an amazing read. Everyone should look at it. And there have been a number of prominent journalists from a bunch of networks who are calling that out. Jake Tapper was tweeting about it, saying, how is this guy who wrote it not the #1 guest on every single show? And I think that's important.
Well, how is it? Why is it?
Well, I'm not a booker. I would have.
Take a guess. If you were to guess why this is not a huge story, what would the reason be?
Liberal bias?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to give it to you.
Look,
I would
Jessica's
say also
very candid. Listen to her. She is.
I mean, what have I got to lose at this point?
I'm glad that you said it.
What does she have to lose?
Right. When Trump said it, that wasn't cute, though. You said that Iran cheats on the deal constantly. Rex Tillerson and a number of officials have said that's not
Iran
the case.
Cheats,
Nikki Haley,
cheats generally.
the evidence that she put out there at the UN, there are a number of defense officials that are pushing back on that, who are saying that they can't be sure as to when that drone was up there.
Back.
No, I'm just saying that these aren't definitive. I'm looking to see, what do other officials say about this? Do they say they are cheating on the deal?
Iran cheats systematically on almost everything.
Yes.
That's my point. State
sponsor of terrorism funneling our cash to these terrorist organizations.
Wasn't it their cash in the first place?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. You know what? The courts actually have held up Iranian assets in these banks in the United States because it's owed to the families of those victims of terrorism. Right on the heels of an epic win on tax reform, new reports that there could be some tension in the White House over the 2018 midterms. Will recent legislative victories help secure seats for Republicans, or do they have reason to be worried?
Jazz hands. Fox News alert, sweeping tax reform, now the law of the land. We saw it happen. He signed. Outnumbered Overtime, I'm Harris Faulkner. The president delivering on a promise of a big, beautiful tax cut for Christmas. President Trump on his way to the winter White House in Florida after signing landmark tax reform into law. And a short while ago at the White House, the president talked about why he was signing the legislation into law now rather than waiting for a formal signing ceremony after the holiday break. Watch.
I was going to wait for a formal signing sometime in early January, but then I watched the news this morning and they were all saying, will he keep his promise? Will he sign it by Christmas? You were one. But will he sign it by Christmas? And I called downstairs. I said, get it ready. We have to sign it now.
Did you see him call out one of the reporters who'd said that? Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us now from the North Lawn. Now, that's how you know you can get stuff done. He saw it and fixed it.
Exactly. The president also gave out some pens, by the way. Typically, when he signs these bills, he has a lot of pens that are designated for the people who helped get the bill through, the sponsors and co-sponsors of the bill. They were nowhere to be found, so he had a whole pile of cross pens on his desk, and he gave them out to the press pool, which was a nice little Christmas present from the president. You know, we began to talk last hour, Harris, about the president looking ahead to 2018. Now the tax reform is behind him and working with Democrats to get some of this done. Let's put up the big agenda items for you on the screen so you can follow along. The president plans on tackling rebuilding the U.S. infrastructure, immigration reform, and welfare reform. The president is going to need bipartisan support, in the Senate at least, on a couple of those issues. Unlike tax reform, for example, which passed through a reconciliation process, infrastructure needs 60 votes to pass. It's something that Democrats have supported in the past, so that's likely where the president will start in 2018. Listen to what he said at the Oval Office.
Infrastructure is by far the easiest. People want it, Republicans and Democrats. We're going to have tremendous Democrat support on infrastructure, as you know. I could have started with infrastructure. I actually wanted to save the easy one for the one down the road. So we'll be having that done pretty quickly.
So the president is hoping that maybe he can set the table for some bipartisanship by tackling infrastructure. Then he wants to move on to immigration reform. This is going to be a whole different ballgame when it comes to the Democrats, because the president and the Democrats are on completely polar opposite sides of the issue here. Though in the middle here, he could find some middle ground with a fix for the so-called Dreamers, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. The president also wants to tackle welfare reform, as we said, though that can be done through reconciliation. President Clinton did that in 1996. The president, though, thinks that Democrats may change their minds, as you see him putting pen to paper here, signing the tax reform plan here, when they start to see the results of tax reform and how that becomes a real force driving the American economy. Listen to what the president said here.
I think the Democrats will really regret. The Democrats already regret it. You know, they have their typical thing, it's for the rich. They know that's not true. And they've been called out on it by the media, actually. But the Democrats very much regret it. They wanted to be a part of it, just doesn't work out. But I really do believe, and I said on social media today, I really do believe we're going to have a lot of bipartisan work done.
The president saying there that he thinks that Democrats will rue the day that they did not sign on to tax reform. One curious little thing that happened today, Harris. We were told a couple of days ago that the president was going to have a year-end press conference, such as President Obama, President Bush, President Clinton, and others have done before heading on Christmas vacation. They decided today, though, that they weren't going to do that. And I think maybe the decision was made that they had this fabulous victory with tax reform, just let that marinate for a while. The president only had one formal press conference in 2017, but Mr. President, if you're watching aboard Air Force One as you wing your way down to Mar-a-Lago, we'd like the opportunity to put some more questions to you in 2018. So,
well, look,
see you in the new year.
Not to put too fine a point on it. By the way, did you get a pen?
No, I didn't. I wasn't in the pool, so.
Oh, nobody brought you one back? I'm from the South. We always bring somebody something.
I did get a pen for Christmas, though, from my good friend Michelle Tuzzi, who's the big anchor at KABC in Los Angeles. So,
real quickly, though, with that idea about the news conference, you know, we've had so much press availability with this president. I don't know that it's necessarily fair to say that reporters didn't get a bite at the apple today. Yeah, it wasn't that formal thing that every president usually does, not every, but some, on that Friday before Christmas. But they got press availability they thought they weren't going to get today in that room. I mean, he signed. You could ask. You saw he took questions. I'm just putting that out there.
Initially, Harris, it was closed. They decided to open it, and I guess the president had a few things to say. But you know what, Harris? As much access as we got to the president in various forms, those big formal news conferences, those are major national public events. Every other president that I have covered, and many before that, have had multiple press conferences during the course of the year. It's something that we in the White House press corps always encourage, because we just think it's part of the national dialogue to be able to ask the president a question in a formal setting like that.
You never know what President Trump will do. Let's see what happens.
Oh,
Good to
yeah,
see you.
that's for sure. We'll
Merry
see you.
Christmas.
Thanks.
Enjoy your
Same to
friend's
you.
pen.
I will, thank you.
Okay.
It's interesting about the pen. It's actually made.
We gotta go.
In part,
I'm sorry.
Made
We've got
in
a
part from
lawmaker
an illegal
waiting.
gun. Yeah, all right.
All right. Thanks, John. In addition to signing tax reform into law, the president signed a measure that keeps the government open for another 4 weeks, which means Congress is punting on some of its most disputed issues, but it also means the government isn't going to shut down before Christmas. Some of those issues: immigration, health care, the budget. Joining us now is Republican Congressman Mike Kelly, who sits on the House Ways and Means Committee. Great to see you this morning. Let's talk a little bit about momentum, if we can. How
Sure.
much are you feeling that, and did that aid you in getting that continuing resolution signed?
Listen, you know what, Harris? I'll tell you what. For those people on the Trump train or not on the Trump train, this is high-speed rail right now. And so if you're not on the Trump train, you better get on the train or get off the tracks. You're going to get run over. Look. You know, the House had done its work in the appropriations. We had our 12 bills ready to go. Unfortunately, they didn't get through the Senate. But the big news is for America. You look at today, and I can tell you, walking around the streets of Pittsburgh, people walking more erect, not just whispering Merry Christmas, but saying, hey, Merry Christmas. You can feel it. You can see it. And I'm not just pumping sunshine for the sake of pumping sunshine. I'm telling you, this is a different country. In 11 months, this president has changed the entire complexion of our entire country and our place in the world. We're no longer leading from behind. We're leading from the front, and everybody else is looking to us and say, go, go, go.
Congressman Kelly, that line of pumping sunshine is going to get a hashtag. I can feel it already on social media. Let's talk a little bit, though, about the battle that lies ahead. You know, the president did say that there's an opportunity for Democrats if they want to get together with infrastructure. I'm curious to see if he'll start there. I know that House Speaker Paul Ryan has talked about starting with entitlements, welfare reform. Where do you think that the battle will begin, and where the victories will come?
Well, you know, I think the big victories, and I think the president's absolutely right on this, it is going to come on infrastructure, because there's tremendous agreement that if we're going to make America great again, we got to look at what makes America great. And it is our infrastructure. So whether it's our rails, our roads, our rivers, whatever it is, or our runways, we've got to get back to who we are as a country. We no longer can have a third world look and be a first-class nation. So I look at that. There is great agreement on getting that work done. So I would say, and I agree completely with this president, because there's nobody that understands business better than this guy. And it's always ahead of time and below budget. We can do things that are great for America right now today. Making America great again begins with making our infrastructure great again. So I'd like to see us go forward with that, because there's such great opportunity and great bipartisan support for it.
You know, I feel your energy. I'm wondering if everybody can stay this excited through the holiday season, because when the new year dawns, you've punted with a continuing resolution, the battle over the budget, through January 19th. Outside of infrastructure, it will get difficult, though. Immigration, the Dreamers Act with DACA.
Sure.
You've got some things that are coming down the pike. And before we even get to those, tax reform, do you really think you have to sell it so hard, or can you turn the corner without doing that?
Well, you know what? We have to sell it hard, because too many people are saying about the downside of it. It's so upside down what they're saying, and what they're saying defies what actually is happening in the marketplace in America right now. For instance, where I'm from, in Pennsylvania's 3rd Congressional District, that average family of 4, middle income earners, about $74,000 a year, they're going to get to keep almost $2,000 of their own money instead of sending it off to the federal government. I'd like to see them. They earned it. Let them keep it. Let them spend it the way they want, or save it the way they want. There's just so much good. You know, Harris, this time of the year, and I'm sure you're like me, as young children, we make out our list to Santa Claus, and we tell them everything we want, and we send it off to the North Pole. And then we come down Christmas morning, and underneath the tree are all these wonderful gifts. Now, I'm sure you're like me. I never got everything I wanted, but boy, was I glad for everything we got. This is truly a December to remember. This is the best thing that's happened to America in a long, long time. I'm so excited. Everybody wins.
I got to step into the president giving a shout out to some of the companies passing on those tax cut savings to their employees. Let's take a look at that.
You have some great companies. I want to thank AT&T, who actually was the first out of the box. and Boeing and Sinclair and Wells Fargo and Comcast, even though they own NBC, which is not so nice to the presidency or the president. But Comcast also, they all have made tremendous contributions to their employees and tremendous contributions to spending money in this country because of the tax bill.
All right, so in that, we'll let the president have the last word, but I want to go back to that fight over DACA and other issues that will be tough in 2018.
Well, listen, there are going to be some tough issues, but you know what? We get elected to do the right things for the right reasons because good things will happen. We've got to solve these problems, and we've got to do them in a way that is truly bipartisan. I'm so tired of looking at a country that's divided and not united. We are not the divided states of America. We are the United States of America.
Do you think you can get some
to
Democrats to come on board with the Dreamers Act, and are Republicans willing to meet them halfway?
You know what? I think we're all willing to work together. I think you got to be careful that you don't get polarized and you don't go so far down a road that you can't come back because then people say you flip-flopped. Look carefully at what's going on and make sure that you understand the issue before you start popping off. Sometimes you look back and say, boy, I wish I hadn't said it that way. There's a lot more to this than what I realized. We have an obligation and a responsibility, and I feel so privileged that the people of Pennsylvania's 3rd Congressional District sent me to Washington to represent them, that I'm looking forward to the discussion, I'm looking forward to the debate, and I'm looking forward to doing the right thing.
I like what you said, that part about don't go so far down one road that it looks like you flipped. That's probably good advice on a whole host of things in life. Congressman Kelly of the great state of Pennsylvania, Merry Christmas, and thank you for your time.
You know, Harris, Merry Christmas to you and to all our Fox watchers. Appreciate it.
Hey, how about that? Thanks. All right, my next guest says he believes that the president heads into the Christmas holidays and the new year with a lot of momentum, probably channeling a little bit of that congressman's energy there. Hugo Gurdon is the editorial director of the Washington Examiner. You know, so you put this, Hugo, in a category differently than the congressman. You look at it kind of at 37,000 feet politically and say what about momentum?
The president is heading into the new year and through Christmas with great momentum. The thing that's happened just recently is he's flipped the script. The Republicans have flipped the script. For 11 out of the last 12 months, the narrative has been neither the president nor the Republican Congress, despite controlling Washington, are getting anything done. And then suddenly, they've checked off a really big, perhaps the biggest item on their agenda, which is the tax reforms. But that comes on top of a whole lot of other things. They've crushed ISIS on the battlefield. They've cut red tape. They've repealed the Obamacare individual mandate. There's a lot of things that they've been doing which has changed the narrative about how successful and how much they're getting done.
You know, Hugo, I'm curious. I've heard you say, and I've got it in my notes to ask you about this because you and I have talked about it, that sometimes you know your greatest victories by what your enemies or your opponents in this situation are saying about you. What do you? How do you think that applies to this situation?
Well, I mean, just to take one quotation, Minority Leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, said that the tax bill, the tax reforms were going to be an anchor around the necks of the Republicans going into the 2018 elections. Now, when your political opponents who want you to lose the election are saying, hey, don't do this, it's going to do you a lot of harm, basically you know that they're telling you that it's going to be a success, or they worry that it's going to be a success. I think that the Democrats are probably, even though the public opinion right now is on their side and the bill is unpopular, they are really worried, perhaps terrified, that people are going to start feeling, hey, I've got more money in my pocket, the economy is picking up, and that it will help the Republicans in the 2018 elections rather than harming them.
You know, I took a look at some of this polling and dug deeper because I always like to look at the questions. I think it's fair to say that the American public right now in some of those polls are feeling skittish about the unknown. And it's not necessarily that they are pushing against Republicans or this bill. They are pushing against something that is unknown. And that may seem 197 pages of confusion for them. And as things kind of get worked out, we'll have to see what happens in the new year. The president challenges after February 1st, people will see it in their paychecks, and that will be enough. I do want to talk with you a little bit, though, about where the congressman was. And he said something interesting. He said, don't go so far down a road with regard to immigration and DACA and the Dreamers specifically, as he was speaking, that you seem like you flip-flop. How cautionary is that tale?
I think that it's always a good idea in politics, and most politicians.
But with that particular issue.
Do you mean on the taxes?
Dreamers and DACA?
Oh, well, I think that on that particular issue, it's very important that the Republicans do not get into the position where they seem like they're against all immigration, that they seem unfair to children who arrived here through no fault of their own, who were brought here. It's also very important for the Democrats because, you know, one of the really interesting things that happened in the passage of the spending bill was that the Republicans were able to pass the spending bill to keep the government open without Democratic votes. And part of what the Democrats wanted was some language in there about the dreamer immigration. And I think it's important for the Democrats not to think that they can hold the government up on dreamer immigration.
Yeah, and that CHIP, that insurance program for children that fills in the gap between Medicaid and their parents being able to get insurance on their jobs, that was something that Democrats said they were worried about, and it got passed in the CR, this continuing resolution, so that gets kicked down the can. They were very worried about that, so they did get something that they wanted as well. Hugo Gurdon, great to see you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you. The midterms will approach quickly after the first of the year. Hillary Clinton is reportedly mulling what role she may play in 2018. Some Democrats worry she brings too much baggage and could be a detriment to their party. Are they right? And Republicans want answers after a report claims the Obama administration gave a free pass to terrorist Hezbollah's drug trafficking and money laundering operations, all to make sure not to derail the Iran nuclear deal. Should someone be held accountable? Who is it, and what would accountability look like? Stay close. Congressional Republicans are calling out the Justice Department, demanding all documents related to alleged efforts by the Obama administration to weaken a task force targeting criminal activities by Hezbollah terrorists. A Political report claims Obama's team thwarted a decade-long DEA investigation, possibly allowing the Iranian-backed terror group to pump drugs into the U.S. in order not to anger Iran and preserve the landmark nuclear deal. Lawmakers say they're looking at evidence which could implicate top former Obama officials, including National Security Council official Ben Rhodes. He was one of the key architects of that Iran nuke deal. Let's bring in Congressman Ron DeSantis, a Republican from Florida, and one of the lawmakers who sent the letter seeking answers. This is unbelievable. Congressman?
Yeah, I mean, look, Harris, Hezbollah is one of the most lethal terrorist groups in the world, and they have American blood on their hands. You go back to 1983, the bombing of the Marine Corps barracks in Beirut, Lebanon. That was done at the hands of Hezbollah. They were active in supporting Shia militia in Iraq, targeting U.S. troops, and of course, they're one of the biggest problems in places like Syria and in terms of the groups that our ally Israel worries about. So to do anything that would give them a free pass in either drug running or money laundering, that is a major, major issue. Now, we've known from the beginning, Ben Rhodes said that the Iran deal was the Obamacare of the second term, and they did make everything subservient to getting that deal, that sheet of paper that they could wave around. And I think a lot of us in the Congress realized that they were going out of their way to bend over backwards to placate Iran. But I don't think any of us thought they went quite this far.
Yeah, you know, so one thing that pops into my mind is this another instance of the Obama administration looking at a terror group and saying they're JV-like? You know, let's underestimate the damage that they can do so that we can kind of compartmentalize. Is that what we're looking at? Because that's some dangerous stuff. We've learned some deadly lessons by calling ISIS JV to begin with.
Well, if you remember, when the administration was in its early years, you had people like John Brennan, who was the counterterrorism guy, later became the CIA director. He was saying, look, we've got to look at Hezbollah, and we got to try to separate the good from the bad within Hezbollah.
What does that mean?
Well, it doesn't mean much to most people who understand terrorism and understand that this is a group that has very nefarious purposes in mind. But nevertheless, that was a view. And so did that naive view play into it? Or was it, hey, at this point we realize Hezbollah is bad, but we're willing to empower them in order to get this deal? And remember, Harris, even after the deal, when you had the $150 billion in sanctions relief, and then you had the U.S. government airlifting in pallets of cash over $1 billion, Secretary of State John Kerry acknowledged that some of that money was going to go to fund terrorism. And so you may have a situation where in order to do the Iran deal on the front end, by deep-sixing these prosecutions, you were letting money flow to Hezbollah. But then on the back end, by getting all the cash, that ends up going to the Revolutionary Guard Corps and to groups like Hezbollah. So it could be empowering Hezbollah on both sides of this Iran deal.
Congressman, when you look at what Ambassador Nikki Haley put together, you had that poster behind her at the UN, and it showed the warehouses where weapons were being held and then sent on to the Yemeni rebels to fight a war there. And the markings of Iran on that weaponry. It was, and I quote the ambassador, like there was a made in Iran sticker on some of the stuff. I mean, how does that fit into this conversation? Because that had to, in my estimation at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of that had to be going on during the last administration. President Trump's only been in office for less than a year.
Oh, without question. I mean, I think what you've seen is this Iran deal was flawed just on its terms because, you know, you're not dealing with their missile program, which would deliver a nuclear weapon, and you don't have access to the military sites, which is where they would most likely build one of these weapons. But then apart from that, as the deal was being negotiated and then after the deal was being negotiated, the Iranian regime increased its belligerent behavior throughout the Middle East. Yes, in places like Yemen. Yes, in Lebanon with supporting Hezbollah, and Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East. And that has been a constant. So Ben Rhodes created the echo chamber saying, hey, the Iranians are changing. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Let's give them these concessions so we can start working together. In fact, they knew that wasn't true. And the proof's been in the pudding because the behavior has gotten worse since the Iran deal.
All right, we always talk about accountability. Before I let you go, I'm wondering about punishment, because accountability is one thing. You can point fingers at people, but this potentially put us in harm's way. Would you say, and what's the punishment?
Well, look, we've got to get all the facts. I mean, I think there's a lot of troubling allegations. We've got to get this. We're going to have to bring in and do a lot of depositions. We're going to have to get a lot of documents. I think the Justice Department is likely to want to help work with us, I think, because it's a new administration. But we got to get those facts and then see where they lead. But I think one fundamental question is, if this stuff was deep-sixed, who at Justice did it, and were they acting on their own volition? My instinct would be no, that it would come from somewhere in the White House. And so obviously you have President Obama, you have people like Ben Rhodes, Valerie Jarrett. We just got to get the answers to those questions.
All right, Congressman DeSantis of the great state of Florida, enjoy the sunshine down there over the holiday. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Wow. Tough topic right before the holiday, right? In an effort now to halt a surge of illegal immigrants coming into the United States from Central America, the DOJ reportedly is considering a proposal to separate parents and children detained at the border. Is that a good idea? Or is it too harsh? We'll have a former top DOJ official weigh in after the break. Stay close.